we've been around this hotel listening to talks on all sorts of topics for the past few days. And I don't know about you, but I got a lot out of this. You know, we had a tagline for this conference. The conference is titled Philosophy for Freedom and Flourishing, and then we have our tagline, sharpen your mind, fuel your soul, excel in life, fight for liberty. And I think walking away from this conference, I certainly feel like I accomplished all of those things a little bit more, or the ability to do all of those things a little bit better. And that's what it's all about. The reason we chose Philosophy for Freedom and Flourishing as the title of this event is because, as I see it, the two most important things in the world are freedom and flourishing. Freedom is just the political context that enables you to do the things you need to flourish, so that's why that's essential. But every other good thing in life is just a portion of flourishing. It's just a means to that end. Flourishing is the end. A lifetime of happiness, which is essentially what flourishing is, that's the goal. What other goal could there be? What other rational goal could there be than that? So I want to reflect for a moment on the conference and, oops, I went to the wrong one. How did that go there? There we go, that's my first one. These are some of the things that we have talked about and seen and experienced at this conference. We had lectures on your mind, on independence, on clear thinking, tools for Alex's lecture on the human flourishing framework. We had lectures and presentations on poetry, music, paintings, film, art in general. We talked about healthcare, fitness, career, creating values, trading in the marketplace, rights, politics, freedom. We socialized, lots of fun in the evenings. All of these things that we did, the purpose behind all of them, the ultimate goal of all of them, was to enhance our lives. That's all this is. The reason we're here is to enhance our lives, and all of these things were just a means to that end. And it's interesting to note, after we've gone through this at a conference like this, after we've just done this with all sorts of different topics that all integrate in different ways, who felt the integration here? Who felt like, oh my God, all this stuff just keeps fitting together and fitting together? Yeah, and it does, because all of these endeavors and all of these topics and all of the things we covered and engaged in, they're all aimed at the same thing, human flourishing. And they were all based on the same fundamental premise, and that is that your mind is capable of knowing this reality so that you can flourish. That was just the implicit premise behind everything here. And the reason I want to focus on this specifically with respect to what we talked about and engaged in and saw at this conference is because this is the way that you should look at philosophy as well, in my view. So I want to talk to you about a way to look at a particular philosophy, Objectivism, which is the philosophy that I subscribe to, and I know a lot of people here subscribe to it as well. But I think there's a neat way to look at Objectivism and to understand it, and then if you do understand it and think it's true, then also a neat way to use this tool I'm going to give you to employ the philosophy and its principles in your life. And I call it Purpose X, the reasons for which will become obvious as we proceed. But before we get there, I want to talk about another kind of an X, the hierarchy X, for lack of a better term. This is a diagram that I first saw used by Leonard Peikoff. And I'm not sure whether he originated it, but it's brilliant, so I want to give him credit. Whether he did originate or not, it's certainly not original to me. But what this is it's a diagram about the nature of philosophy in terms of the hierarchical structure of the science. Now, there's some highfalutin words on here that I'll talk about in a minute. I'm not a big fan of any language that's not plain and clear and simple, so we'll break the big ones down. But the gist of this is you see an X, in effect, if you follow those arrows two ways. You have 2 points at the bottom, a point in the middle, and 2 at the top. And what's going on here is that this X shows the hierarchical structure of philosophy. Not necessarily just objectivism. This is the hierarchical structure of any philosophy. This is a generic chart. So epistemology is just the branch of philosophy that studies the nature and means of knowledge. How do we acquire knowledge? How do we validate it? Questions like that. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy that studies and answers questions about the nature of reality, the fundamental nature of reality. Where do we live? What is the nature of this place? What are the fundamental laws of the environment in which we exist? From there, and based on what your answers to those questions are, you're going to arrive at a view about how you should act, about what is the good, what's the standard of value, and what you should and shouldn't do in life based on that standard. And then above that, moving upward, depending on what your answers to those 3 branches of philosophy are, you're going to arrive at a view of politics, the nature of a proper social system, and some ideas on aesthetics, on art. What is the purpose of art? What's it for? Why do you need this thing? And so on. So this shows the hierarchical structure because you've got the fundamental branches of philosophy at the base and so on. It's pretty obvious at this point what that's all about. Now, the reason that this is generic and applies to all philosophies, I'll just point out. So whether you were talking about Plato's metaphysics, the idea that there are 2 worlds, there's the world of forms, and then there's this imperfect world that's sort of a reflection, an imperfect reflection of that world, that would be his metaphysics. So Plato held that there were 2 worlds. As against what? Well, as against the Aristotelian view that there's just one world, this world that we perceive with our senses. So they had a different metaphysics. Christianity has a metaphysics that's akin to Plato's. So there's 2 worlds in Christianity. There's the supernatural world and this world in which we live. So you see there are and then there's the postmodernist / subjectivist view that there are 0 worlds. There's 0 reality. There's no such thing, there's no reality, man, that kind of thing. Meaning that what? That reality is created by the human mind. So either general consensus creates reality or the individual's feeling creates reality. So there's social subjectivism or personal subjectivism. And the idea there is that there's no such thing as reality. It's just made up in the mind. So those are the different, fundamental different metaphysics that somebody could hold. Epistemology, you could say that the question here is what is our means of knowledge and how do we validate knowledge? Well, what are the alternatives? Well, we could say that you acquire knowledge by means of revelation and faith, at least really important knowledge you get that way, and maybe you get some other knowledge this way. Most religions hold this, right? The idea that the important knowledge, really important knowledge, like moral principles, where do they come from? They come from God in some form or another, and you learn them either by revelation or faith or some combination of that, or by turning to the Pope and asking him what he has learned by means of revelation or faith. But that's where they come from. Or your means of knowledge could be group consensus or the dictates of the Führer, right? So it could be social subjectivism in the form of what's true is whatever the Führer says is true, or whatever the Volk says is true. This was the case for the National Socialists. That was the idea behind their means of knowledge, and so on. So you see the idea. Or for the just sheer subjectivist, the personal subjectivist, truth is whatever I think it, whatever I feel it is, right? Versus reason, the Aristotelian idea. Your means of knowledge is reason. You observe the world using your senses. You integrate the things that you observe into concepts, and you denote those with words, and they enable you to think in terms of the objects that you've perceived, and you can build on those, integrating them into more abstract concepts, and then ultimately into generalizations and principles and so on. But it's all based on observation and logic. and that's the Aristotelian approach, and also, incidentally, Ayn Rand's general approach. So there are different kinds of metaphysics and epistemology, and they're going to give rise to a particular kind of morality, depending on what your answers to those are. So what is the standard of moral value? When you start asking that question, the first thing that comes up, well, how would we ever know such a thing? Oh, we have to go back down to our means of knowledge. If our means of knowledge is revelation and faith, then the answer to what is the standard of moral value is going to be, well, we have to use revelation and faith to figure that out. If the most important reality of the two realities is supernature, then whatever supernature dictates is going to be the standard of value. If God says the standard of value is to live for God, then it's to live for God. If it's to sacrifice for God, it's to sacrifice. If God says you must murder your son, Isaac, to ensure that your obedience to me is complete, then that's what you must do, right? And so, I'm pulling on an actual biblical story. So that's where your morality is going to come from, your view down there. If your view is that there's one reality, the one in which we live and perceive with our senses, your means of understanding it is your mind, your reasoning mind, and your ability to perceive that world, then when you get to the question, what is the standard of moral value, you're going to say, I'll have to think about that, because I'm going to have to observe reality and see what facts give rise to the need of the idea even of a standard of value, and then I have to do some thinking and figure that out. And this is the general approach that Aristotle took and other Aristotelians, and it's definitely the general approach that Ayn Rand took. And so she arrived at a particular standard of value on that basis. If it's social subjectivism, by the time you get to the question of what's the right thing to do, I don't know, we'll have to take a poll. We'll ask, we'll find out what the consensus is, and that will tell us what's the right thing to do. So you see how the hierarchy works. It really is the case that whatever your answers to these lower, more fundamental questions are, they're going to affect what your upper answers are. What kind of political system should we have? Well, it depends. What's the right thing to do? If the right thing to do is to sacrifice for God and obey his will, then we're going to have a theocracy, right? Got to make sure people do the right thing. If the right thing to do is to act on your own judgment in pursuit of your values so that you can live and flourish, then you're going to need a political system that enables you to do that. So you'll need one that bans physical force from social relationships so that you're free to act on your judgment. If the right thing to do is to serve the Volk and that you are just, a cog in the collective, a dispensable cog in the collective, then what you should do is serve the Volk, and you need a political system that ensures that you do that. Get to aesthetics. What's the purpose of art? Well, maybe it's to glorify God, to give penance to God. Maybe it's to ensure, maybe it's propaganda to ensure that the so-called individuals understand their place in the Volk and that they're going to act accordingly. So what is art? Well, it's a concretization of fundamental values and truths in the artist's mind. And it fuels us one way or the other. It has influence on us in terms of values and in terms of action and in terms of reverence. So art, depending on your moral principles and your epistemological principles and your metaphysical principles, you're going to have a different view of what art is and what it should be and what its purpose is. If your view is that you should live and flourish by the judgment of your mind, then by the time you get to aesthetics, you say, what we need art that concretizes the values that help people to see that that's the right thing to do and that success is possible and that success is the way to, is the thing to strive for. So you see how that all works hierarchically. And I love this because it's a beautiful structure and it really explains a lot about philosophy, any philosophy. And it helps you to understand the importance of philosophy too. But there's another way to form an X, and that is to, instead of looking at it in terms of hierarchy, is to lay it down in effect and look at it in terms of the relationship of these branches to each other in terms specifically of the purpose of these fields. Before we get there, though, I want to fill in a blank that we'll need for this purpose X to make sense. And that blank is some objectivist ideas that I've learned from Rand that will make sense of the purpose X. So the next thing I want to talk about very briefly is Ayn Rand's general definition of morality and then her view of the purpose of morality. Now, Ayn Rand has a theory of morality that's really rich, and she has demonstrated, in my view, you have to look and see for yourself, but in my view, she's demonstrated that the standard of moral value is the requirements of human life, and that's what we should be aiming to do in life. And we can talk about that briefly, especially if someone wants to get into it in the Q&A, we can get into it. But I'm going to assume that her theory is true for the purposes of this talk because I want to place something in the middle of the X that will assume that. But the first definition here, morality is a code of values to guide your choices and actions. Now stop right there before we get to the bracket. That's a generic definition of morality. That's true of any morality, whether it's altruism is the morality that says that being moral consists, or being good consists in self-sacrificially serving others. So you should do that, that's what you should do, and that principle should guide your choices and actions. Hedonism is the idea that the standard of moral value is pleasure. So what you should do is seek pleasure. That principle should guide your choices and actions. So this is true of all moralities, and it's also true of the objectivist morality, and then we can include the bracket here. So morality is a code of values to guide your choices and actions, in effect, for a life of flourishing. Now, Rand actually didn't use the term flourishing, but I think it very well encapsulates sort of a phrase that she often used, or a set of phrases that she used, because she held that life is the standard of value, and that purpose, and that happiness, the achievement of your own happiness, is the purpose of morality. And so, in effect, what she held is that a lifetime of happiness is what we're after. And that's what flourishing really refers to. So I like the word, but I just want to make clear that she didn't actually use it. I like it so much we've used it in this conference name, obviously. So, but this is basically the definition of morality, and I think it's a fair, even generic, just the generic part is hard for anybody to argue against. And then if you add for a life of flourishing or a lifetime of flourishing, you get sort of the objectivist idea of what this is. And the lower quote is directly from Rand. The purpose of morality is to teach you to not to suffer and die, but to enjoy yourself and live. And this is a radical idea. This is exactly the opposite of what other moral codes have held. It was always, you have to serve God, or you have to serve the group, or you have to serve the king. There was always some other standard, and in Rand's view, it's the life of the individual. And this comes right out of her metaphysics and her epistemology, because she thinks there's one world and that your means of knowing it is your mind. With that in mind, we can look briefly at what the meaning of standard of value is, just real quick. So this is, the top paragraph here is written by me, not Rand, but I think it's a good summation of an idea of hers, and I think it captures it well for my purposes today. Human life, so the standard of value according to objectivism is human life. What does that mean? Human life, life in accordance with our nature as human beings, the kind of animal we are, we're a specific kind of animal, is the standard of moral value. It's the standard by reference to which we can determine which choices and actions are good or bad, right or wrong for human beings, the kind of animal we are. So we're rational beings. We survive and flourish to the extent that we flourish by means of observing reality, integrating our ideas into concepts, principles, etc., and then acting in accordance with those so that our knowledge and our actions correspond to the facts in this reality. That's why she holds this. So that's what she means by human life. And as she put it, and this is in the second paragraph is mostly hers, so as she put it, this observation-based standard encompasses, quote, the terms, methods, conditions, and goals required for the survival of a rational being through the whole of his lifespan in all those aspects of existence which are open to his choice. Now, I want to point out that there are terms, methods, conditions, and goals in there. It's a lot. That's a rich, rich sentence. And I'm going to just point out one item in each of those to give an indication of how rich they are. So terms. Well, one thing that Rand held is that for people to deal with each other, they must do so on voluntary terms. So there's an indication of what she means by terms. Why? Because we're separate individuals whose lives belong to us, and my mind is my means of knowledge, and your mind is your means of knowledge. So the right way for us to exchange values is not to beat each other over the head and steal each other's stuff, but to discuss and persuade and then see whether we can convince each other to trade that way. What does she mean by methods? Well, the method of reason would be a method, right? The kind of animal we are. We need a method for understanding reality, so you use that method that is actually correct given the kind of being that you are. Conditions. What kind of conditions are proper to the life of a rational being? Well, if we're going to act on our judgment so that we can thrive, we need to be free to act on our judgment. So one major condition we need is the condition of freedom. We're going to need a social system that ensures that condition, right? And what does she mean by goals? Well, the goals are all the things that we go after. A goal is that which you act to gain or keep, in her view and in my view, and that is what all of that means. So it's a very rich idea, this idea that life is the standard of value, because we are very rich beings. We're beings of body and mind, matter and spirit. There's just a whole lot going on here. We're not gnats, we don't live for a moment or a day. And we're not just pieces of meat walking around, and we're not ghosts. We have bodies and minds, and the whole thing is integrated, and it's super complex. So we really do need to think carefully and deeply about what we do with this one life that we have. And so having a standard of value that corresponds to all of that is what Rand has done in understanding this. All right, with that in mind, we can come to purpose X. So we see another X here in effect, but instead of it being hierarchical and going upward, we now have the objectivist view of what morality is in the middle. Okay, so morality is about principles and values and actions for flourishing. That's the goal. And this would be different if we had different epistemology and metaphysics here. We would have something different in the middle. In objectivism, we've got living a great life, in effect, in the middle. That's what's there. Then the question becomes, all right, let's look at philosophy afresh in this light. Do we need this thing? Because if we don't need it, then we can just throw it out and go have a cocktail. There's no point in worrying about it, right? Why sit around here and talk about all of this if these things are of no use to us? So if we look at philosophy afresh now and look at metaphysics and epistemology, say, well, all right, well, why do we need to know about the nature and means of knowledge? Why do we need to know about the nature of reality? Well, let's reflect again. We'll start at metaphysics. Let's reflect again on the possible alternatives here. If there are two realms, if there are two different realms, then, and one of those realms is more important than the other, say in the Platonic sense or in the sense of most religions, certainly Judaism, Christianity, and Islam hold that there are two realms. There's the supernatural realm and this natural realm, and that the more important one, the one that we're actually striving ultimately to get to, and the one that our moral actions are ultimately in service of, is somewhere else, right? Then that's really going to affect whether or not we can thrive. But that's not why we want metaphysics. As if our goal is to flourish, we're not trying to give it up here in this life for some other life. We need to know what this world is that we live in, because that's where we live. We need to know whether there are natural laws here and whether they hold. And if they do, then we need to abide by those laws so that we can produce values and live and thrive. So the objectivist view of metaphysics is not only that there's only one world, but also that it's a stable world. Things are what they are. They act only in accordance with their identities. There's a law of causality, right? A bridge built a certain way can support a car. A bridge built improperly will collapse when a car goes onto it, right? At more basic levels, a rose is a rose. It can bloom, it can't speak, right? And knowing the nature of the reality in which we live, which includes, incidentally, human nature, so knowing that human beings are capable of thinking and making choices helps us to understand how to deal with human beings. They have a particular nature. They're a part of this natural world, and we can understand them. And knowing that there is one stable world and not two worlds, or at least there's no evidence for a second world. We could argue about whether we have that certainty or not, but there's certainly no evidence for a second world, means a lot. Also, knowing that the subjectivist idea that there's no such thing as reality, that it's all a matter of opinion, well, walk off the edge of a cliff and tell me whether you'll maintain that position for long. So knowing the nature of the place in which we live enables us to live in that place. It's very important. So philosophy, I think we're going to start to see, is important. Why do we need metaphysics? Because we live in a certain place and we need to know the nature of it. How about epistemology? Does it matter how we gain knowledge? Does it matter whether we know how we gain and validate knowledge? Or can we just forget about this? Well, it does matter, because if we don't say, look, if we don't say what we know, if we know, look, my mind works, I can observe reality, understand it, make integrations, and understand what's true, then somebody's going to come along and say, since you can't understand reality, I'll help you out there. I can understand reality, and since I can and you can't, we've got a perfect relationship here for me to tell you what to do. This is the dream of a dictator, is a citizenry that doesn't think that they can understand reality. And this is precisely what dictatorships do. They convince the people that the people don't know reality. They can't know reality because either that knowledge comes from the Führer, or it comes from those who are in touch with God and actually do get his revelations, or it comes from the Volk, comes from the group. As against, no, my mind is capable of understanding reality, ergo, I need to use it to serve my life, and I can answer people who come along and say, well, you can't know reality. Yes, I can, and I can explain how and why that is. So epistemology is a very important field if you want to live and flourish. If you know that reason is your means of knowledge, and you can explain that, and you can use those ideas in pursuit of knowledge and values, you can live. If not, you can't. Why do we need politics? Well, if our goal is to live and flourish, which it is, politics is extremely important. We need to maintain a free society. We need to maintain the kind of world in which we can act on our judgment, produce values, trade values with others, live in harmony. That's where we want to be if we're thinking, in my view, if we're thinking clearly about what makes sense and the right way for a rational being to live. So aesthetics. What is art all about? Why do we need this thing? Maybe we don't need it. I've heard people say art is useless. Who needs art? Well, yeah, if the art you're looking at is paint thrown at a canvas from 10 feet away, or a urinal sitting in a museum pretending to be art, sure, you don't need these things. They're not going to do anything for you. For the artists who produce that kind of art, I suppose it does something for them. They appear to be wanting to spit at reality, or spit at the idea of beauty, or spit at the idea that human beings have any nature or needs. But I think the art that we heard here, from the poetry that Lisa Van Dam read, to the paintings that we looked at of Brian Larson, to the film ideas that we studied with Patrick Riesenover, et cetera, you can see that no, if living and thriving as a human being is your goal, there's a real value in art. Who was in tears here a few times during the art exhibits, and the poetry and all? So these things have real effect on us, and they do because we have values. Art affects our souls because it affects our values. That's what it does. And it's a really important aspect of life. So understanding art and enjoying art and figuring out what art is to your preference and focusing on that, that's really, really important. So I have used this idea of a purpose X in my own mind for a long time. And the reason that I like it is because it keeps you in the middle of this philosophy. It's like it helps against dogma. It helps against the idea that there's this philosophy that or that the idea of objectivism is there's a philosophy that you have a duty to study and read and then go out there and be an objectivist or an egoist. Well, why? Why should I do any of that? You should use your mind so that you can live, and all objectivism is designed to do is help to keep your mind connected to the reality in which you live so that you can live. That's the whole purpose of the philosophy. It has no other purpose. If objectivism didn't have that purpose, it would be useless and all of its principles would simply be thrown out. All of them. Metaphysics, epistemology, all of it. It wouldn't make any difference. Because you don't need to know what your means of knowledge is unless you want to live. You don't need to know the fundamental nature of reality unless you want to live and enjoy your life. You don't need any of it. And if you see it this way, I think it can help you in multiple ways. First of all, it keeps you in the middle. Secondly, it can alleviate, I know a lot of young people who, when they first come to objectivism, they're overwhelmed because there's so much to it. There's so much to read and there's so much to understand in all of these branches. And it can feel like, wow, should I just do? You don't need to dive in and study every aspect of this thing all at once. Be selective. The philosophy is about living a wonderful life. Treat it that way. If you're interested in learning more about it, pick one of the branches or one of the ideas or a particular article and investigate it. Talk about it with people. If you get bored, move on to something else. And if you find no value in it, it would be wrong to continue investigating it. If there's no value, there's no value. It's just there's no point. So bear in mind that the whole purpose of this philosophy is to make your life great. Keep yourself in the middle of it. Keep yourself in the center of that X as and when you think about objectivism and as and when you apply these principles. And never lose sight of that. Because if you do, it'll keep you anchored. It keeps your mind anchored to reality because the fact of the reason why you need these branches points to facts. Why do I need politics? Because I have to act on my judgment in order to live, so I need a free society. That's a fact that you need to do that. Why do I need to understand my means of knowledge and take care of my mind so that I can understand reality? Because it's a fact that your mind is your means of knowledge and you need to know reality in order to succeed in reality. That's all this philosophy is about. And I don't mean to belittle it by saying that's all it's about. It can sound like I'm just sort of brushing off all the richness. And Ayn Rand has a whole theory of measurement omission, which answers the problem of universals. How do you answer the issue of the one and the many? And there's this huge, vast, and deep set of ideas where Ayn Rand addressed a whole lot of major problems in the history of philosophy. And I don't mean to just shrug all of that off and just say, oh, it's just about living your life. But the only reason you need any of those principles is to enable human flourishing and to support freedom so that we can flourish. It's true. That is the only reason that any of that stuff matters. If it weren't for the goal of living a wonderful life and loving your life, none of it would matter. I want to talk a little bit about the objectivist virtues in particular, because I think this will help to fold into this. So objectivism has, there are 7 virtues that Ayn Rand laid out and defined. And the purpose of every one of these virtues, bar none, in all of their applications, bar none, is to make your life great. That's the only reason that they're in the philosophy, and that's the only reason that there's any value in them to you. And until and unless you understand that they're good for your life, there would be no reason to embrace them. So the question is, are they good for your life? Well, take a look at what they are. So rationality is the recognition and acceptance of the fact that reason is your only means of knowledge, your only proper judge of values, and your only proper guide to action. That's what it is. Well, where did that come from? It came from observing the kind of animal that you are. Reason, if you look throughout history, looking at reality and integrating ideas and using logic, that's how people discovered all of the things we've discovered, from the principles of agriculture to the principles of of medicine to the principles of engineering and so on. And then they used those principles to build things, everything from the iPhone in your pocket to the airplane that brought you here and so on and so forth. It's reason. That's how we understand the world. So Rand acknowledging this says, okay, that's the fundamental value then, because how you know the place in which you live, that's the most important thing of all. So there's her fundamental virtue. You go by the judgment of your mind. Productiveness, this is the virtue of living by the work of your mind, of producing the values on which your life depends. Why is this a virtue? Where did this idea come from? Well, if you don't produce values, you're going to die. Unless you get values from somebody else. I mean, somebody could keep you alive by doing it. But values don't just grow on trees. Even to determine whether an apple or a berry is edible, we have to do some experimenting and whatnot, right? And to have any kind of a human life where we have lots of values, you have to build these things. You have to create values. Look around, everything in here, all the non-human things in here were created, right? And then they were traded by other people who created other things. You know, I'll give you this, you give me that. That's trade. So productiveness is a virtue because of the kind of animal we are and because the goal is to live. We have to produce things. And there's a lot more to the virtue of productiveness in objectivism. Ayn Rand holds that your central purpose in life should be a productive purpose, not because she said so, not because Ayn Rand's the dictator of what you should and shouldn't do. What she's recognizing in when she says that people need a central purpose in life is that we are purposeful creatures. Everything that we do, that we get any satisfaction out of, is when we set an intention and then go after it. The satisfaction comes from the achievement of the intention. And this is why those of us who have careers that we love our careers. Right? This is awesome. I've found this thing I love to do. I wake up my daughter's just started teaching, or not just started, 6 months ago, started teaching aerial gymnastics at a gym where she had been taking aerial gymnastics for a long time. And every day that she runs out the door to go teach, she's all fired up. She's just excited. She gets paid. I don't think she's even seen any of the money. It goes straight into a bank account. I don't think she's even paying attention to the fact that money is going into her bank account because she just loves this thing so much. That's purposeful activity. That's being productive in this. She's trading value for value, and she's getting so much spiritual value out of the thing, she's not even paying attention to the material value she's getting for it. But that's why productiveness is important, because our life depends on it, and our fulfillment in life depends on it. Enjoying life depends on producing values and finding some way to work in a way that fuels your soul. Isaac Morehouse spoke yesterday eloquently on all of this, on the fact that he said a lot of time, don't do what you hate. But his whole purpose there in that negative language was to get rid of all the things you don't like, so that you can narrow the field and find something that you love, and then do that thing. Right? Why is that important? Because given the kind of being that we are, a rational being with intentional needs, the needs of intentions, that's what fuels us. That's like the centerpiece of our life, so hence central purpose. Independence. I spoke a lot about independence the other day, so I'm not going to say a lot about it here. But the idea is that you own yourself, you own your mind, you are the only person who can determine what's true from your perspective. Nobody can think for you, so you have to use your mind, and you have to be very careful not to go by the judgment of others, or not to relinquish your judgment to others. Hence, it's a virtue. So these are just facts. They're identifications of facts about our nature, and then prescriptions based on those identifications. Honesty is the virtue of refusing to fake reality in order to gain a value. Now, obviously, we fake reality all the time in the form of fiction and films and things like that. So she doesn't mean that. She means don't pretend that facts are other than they are in this world in order to try to achieve things. And why? Because you can't. The realm of values is the realm of reality. So if you try to achieve values by pretending that that realm is different than it is, you're removing yourself from the very realm you're trying to achieve something in. A bank robber might feel like he's got a value when he gets away with the money, but he's failing to pay attention to the broad context of the world in which he lives. When you steal things from people and get away, A, you have people chasing you trying to get those things back. B, you have turned yourself into a criminal, which means that you can't tell people who you really are. So now your relationships are either going to only be with other criminals, or you're going to have to start any other relationships by pretending that you're somebody else, and that's going to turn into a web of chaos for you. So mostly you're likely to just end up with a bunch of criminals as friends. That's going to go well for you, right? You know, if you start to think through this stuff, it becomes clear that trying to pretend that facts are other than they are does not work. Now, I have seen people's lives just get destroyed by dishonesty. I've seen companies be destroyed by dishonesty. I talked about one the other day. Theranos was destroyed by dishonesty. And a lot of money was lost. And incidentally, I didn't mention this the other day, but Elizabeth Holmes herself was not focused on reality. She was focused on other people. She was a complete second-hander. Her MO was to try to fool other people. She wasn't focusing on reality. She was focusing on, how can I get money out of these people's pockets for this sham that I've pretended is so. And now she's in jail, I think, awaiting trial. Moving on, integrity. Integrity is just acting on rational principles. It can't be acting on any principle. It has to be acting on rational principles if the other virtues are tied into any of this. Some people think integrity is just walking your talk. So the 9/11 hijackers had lots of integrity because they thought that was the right thing to do, and ergo they went and did it. Well, I don't know, can you have integrity if you're just completely ignoring all of the aspects of reality? That's a floating integrity of some sort. It's certainly not any kind of integrity that's going to serve your life. So integrity in the objectivist view is adherence to rational principles. It's forming rational principles and then keeping your word in effect. You say you're going to do something, you do it. You say that something is important to you, you treat it as important, and so on. So it's walking your talk, so to speak, but it's walking your rational talk, not just any old talk. Justice, it's just the virtue of judging people rationally and then treating them accordingly. Why does that matter? Because that's how you have good relationships. This is just a fact. That's how you have a good relationship. If you want good relationship, you have to meet people who you have mutual values with, and then you have to judge them accordingly, because if they start doing things that are bad, if they become dishonest with you and you ignore that dishonesty, you're going to wind up in relationships that are very, very bad for your life. If you use good judgment and you elect politicians on the basis of good judgment, you can end up with, I guess, reasonably good politicians. It's pretty hard to even imagine that, I guess. But if you completely throw your judgment to the wind and elect people without any thought about it, you can end up with, God knows what. Hitler was elected, and we've elected some buffoons in this country in recent history. So now I'm not saying there were better options either, but the fact is, rational judgment matters. It matters in relationships, personal relationships, love relationships, business relationships, political relationships. If you want good relationships, you must judge people rationally and treat them accordingly. Lastly, pride. Ayn Rand defines pride as moral ambitiousness. I love that term. Moral ambitiousness. What is this? Well, moral, you have to remember that moral for her means going after your values and not sacrificing higher values for the sake of lesser values, greater values for the sake of lesser values. So in her view, what moral ambitiousness is ambitiousness toward making your life the very best life it can be. Treating yourself, your body, your mind to the best of your ability as the ultimately important things that they are. Treating your friends and your family and your lover and your business partners and the like as the important human beings that they are in your lives. They're a big part of your life. They're important, so you treat them with justice and honesty and all of these other virtues. That's what it's all about. That's what this philosophy is all. It's just about living, all of it. And if you see objectivism this way, it starts to peel away some of the concerns. Because objectivism is an absolutist philosophy, it is an absolute philosophy. It says there's absolute right and wrong, black and white, right and wrong. And people get freaked out by that. And you can understand why they get freaked out, because if you think that morality is about sacrificing your values for other people, giving up the values that would make your life great, the last thing in the world you would want is an absolute morality that's proven that you should do that as a matter of consistent principle. Your life would suck if you did that. So there's good reason to be terrified about an absolute morality that is not good for your life. But this is an absolute morality that has no purpose other than to make your life great. That's the whole point of the thing. The principles of objectivism are designed, one and all, to help you live a beautiful life. I want to say a few words about what I call principle as plateau. I always think of principles as the moral high ground. It's a plateau. And as long as you stay on that moral high ground, you are acting on principle, you're thinking in principle, and you're living to support your values and pursue your goals and defend your rights, or whatever the good thing is. So you can put anything up there. You can put a virtue up there, honesty. You could put your love relationship up there, my effort to maintain a wonderful romantic relationship. Any good thing you want to do, you can put it up there. And then I like to think of so the good is just one level. It's just one thing. And anywhere you are in that one area, you're fine. That's good. If you step over, if you violate what you know to be right in any instance, if you violate any principles that you've validated, whether any of the virtues, honesty, integrity, independence, any of those, it puts you on a slippery slope. Now, why does it matter? Because the purpose of these principles is to support your life. And so to the extent that you violate them, you are harming your life. And it can be difficult to see why that is the case sometimes, but if you think holistically about your life, which Objectivism urges you to do because you are an integrated being who lives for decades, if you think holistically, you can see that this is the case. And if you think of principles in this way, and the idea being that if you ever violate a principle, you've simply stepped over this line onto a slippery slope whereby there's nothing to stop you anymore. In your own mind, there's nothing to stop you from going further down the slope, right? So I like to think of it that way, and we're running out of time, and I want to hit on one more thing and have some Q&A. So I'm going to skip past that. If you want to ask any questions about this, let me know. But you play around with this. I'm going to be writing an article on this soon. I've got a section on this in a book I'm working on, but I'm going to play around with it some more in an article. So that will be coming out soon. The last thing I want to talk about briefly is a way in which Ayn Rand summarized her philosophy, particularly her ethics. Now, Ayn Rand was an atheist. She saw no evidence for the existence of God, and she thought that the very idea contradicted the idea that things are what they are and act in accordance with their nature. I mean, a miracle is precisely a violation of the laws of nature. And so on a rational perspective, for Rand, this was just out. She didn't believe in God. But she loved this Spanish proverb. God said, take what you want and pay for it. And she said that this proverb actually beautifully encapsulated her moral code. And this is from her essay, Causality versus Duty, in Philosophy Who Needs It. I urge you to read that if you haven't, or reread it if you have. It's my favorite essay of Rand's, certainly about ethics. And what she means by this Spanish proverb encapsulating her philosophy is, so let's break it down. God said, well, she's not a theist, so what does she mean? She means reality dictates. Reality is a certain way. There's one reality and it has natural laws and they are what they are. Reality dictates that if you want something, so that take what you want, go after the things you want. Wanting things is good. There's nothing, Objectivism isn't against wanting or personal desire or emotions. Quite the contrary. She recognized those as so important that they're in the center of this whole thing. Take what you want and pay for it. How do you pay for the things you want? You use your mind. You think about your life and your values. You figure out how to get the things you want and how to build and design a life of flourishing. God said, reality dictates, take what you want, go after the things that will make your life great, and pay for it. Use your mind, use the fundamental tool that you were given by nature to go after the things that will make your life great. That's what this means. And it's the essence of the entire philosophy. So I call myself often the anti-dogmatist. I can't stand dogma. It revolts me. Anytime I hear somebody using the word should to a child, or thou shalt do this, or whatever, that language has always horrified me. But this does not, but this aversion to dogma doesn't mean that I embrace subjectivism. No, we don't create reality with our mind. Reality is a certain way. If we want to live and flourish in reality, we have to acknowledge that fact. We have to pay attention to what reality actually is. We have to use our minds. We have to pursue our values. Ayn Rand gave us this beautiful tool, and it sort of encapsulates a lot of what Timothy Sandefur talked about in the Enlightenment. And it's right there, and God said, take what you want and pay for it. Or the purpose of your life is not to, the purpose of morality is to teach you not to suffer and die, but to enjoy yourself and live. Remember, Timothy made a big point about this word enjoyment as something to pursue. It's right there in the middle of Rand's ethics. She kind of incorporated all of the great ideas from Aristotle through all of the Enlightenment philosophers, and she condensed it into this beautiful philosophy that, for my part, I can't see anything wrong with it. It just all makes sense and it works for my life. So if you're already embracing objectivism, I hope you found this helpful in terms of just another way to look at it. If you're new to these ideas, I urge you to try to keep this kind of perspective in mind as you learn about it. And in any event, I hope that you will embrace this philosophy in one way or another and thereby flourish. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Let's take some questions.
All right. It may be slightly long-winded, so I'm going to try and go very, very quickly. It's okay to know the virtues and to understand them, and that's well and good, but it can be very difficult to apply them to your everyday life. We saw earlier in the conference Ben Franklin's 13 Virtues, and in his journal, in Franklin's journal, he sketches a daily schedule of his virtues, and he has the days across the top and then the virtues along the side, and he does this for like a year or something like that. And at the end of every day, he would make a mark in his journal where he failed to uphold one of the virtues every day, and then he would have as well a certain virtue every single week that he wanted to focus on. Is there a way to do this with Rand's virtues? Are they applicable to that same kind of framework? And are there certain virtues that you should focus on first so that you can adopt the rest of the virtues more easily later on?
Great question. Did everybody hear that? Is that audible? Okay, so I don't have to repeat it. I've always found it a little bit odd for me personally to think about virtues as something that you'll sort of check off whether you've done this thing today. I've never done that, and I've never embraced that idea. I've heard of people talking about doing it. I do use checklists for my getting things done, and I check those things off. But I think that if you study these virtues, and especially if after studying them you reread Rand's fiction and other good fiction, and then pay attention to great films and great television shows, and we just rewatched, but for the first time with our daughter, Veronica Mars, fabulous. It's a teenager's show, but it's all about good and bad and right and wrong and making good decisions and stuff. And if you watch that, if you understand these virtues and you watch a show like that, what you do is you just see concretizations of these virtues, or their opposites in the case of other people, as it goes through. And those concretizations will fuel your soul over time and help you to just sort of become a person who makes these things second nature, which is the way that Aristotle spoke about virtue also. So I don't see personally any value in that, but if it helps you to learn the virtues in some way and to incorporate them, there's no question that these ideas, they're true. They're derived from reality. They're facts. They're just truths. In my view, I don't want to bark this at anybody because you have to see that for yourself or you shouldn't embrace it. That's just But that's one of the virtues. It's the virtue of independence. If it doesn't make sense to you, you should not embrace it. But I think that once you study and do see it, that you'll start to be able to live by them without the need of a checklist of that sort. So
Thank
it's an interesting idea, though. Sure.
Hey, so you talked about the 7 virtues Rand outlined, and I know she said, or it was either your own book, that there are secondary virtues, like the virtue of benevolence, virtue of empathy, virtue of patience, and especially from your talk yesterday, there's certain value in those, like it's better to explain to your kid why you do something rather than saying, because I told you so. Yeah. So there's value in being patient. So my question is, how come these secondary virtues aren't essential?
I missed
how come these secondary virtues, like the virtue of patience, empathy, benevolence, aren't one of the main primary essential ones? How come they didn't make the cut, basically?
How do they relate to each other?
But how come they didn't? Yeah, why aren't they part of the main?
Oh, why aren't they main?
virtues?
All right, let's take one. I'll give you 2 to work with. So Rand held that courage. I talked about courage the other day. And she held that courage is a virtue, but she held that it was a species of another virtue, integrity. Okay? I quoted C.S. Lewis the other day to the effect that courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Well, Rand held, I think Timothy Sandifer used a quote from Rand today, and he used one portion of it. I'll finish it. So serenity comes from the ability to say yes to existence. And that quote went on to say, courage comes from the ability to say no to the wrong choices of others. And so, and she's putting courage there in a social context, and I don't know that it's always in a social context, because I think that courage, you could be on a desert island and be fighting off wild animals, and you're going to need courage there. So I don't think that it's necessarily always social, but she definitely thought that courage was a virtue, and I certainly agree that it is, and I think C.S. Lewis was exactly right in saying that it's the form of each virtue at the testing point. So there's that, and the reason that she didn't include it in one of her 7 is because she thought it was a species of one of those, and if you get too many, she also holds in epistemology a principle called unit economy, and the Crow epistemology, you know about that. So we can only deal with but so many units, right? And you get too many, it's hard to retain them. 7 is a very nice number. It's sort of the peak of what we can retain. Incidentally, Rand also held, at least in some respect, that selfishness is a virtue, or she wouldn't have put it on the title. She also certainly held that objectivity is a virtue. No question, objectivity is a virtue, but she didn't name that either. She didn't name every virtue that exists. She named 7 that she thought were key and core. Benevolence, let's take that, because some people have claimed that benevolence is a virtue. But you can tell very quickly that a benevolence is not a virtue, because a virtue is something that you should do as a matter of principle. But it's not true that you should always be benevolent to people. If somebody is a horrifically bad person, you should not treat him with benevolence. So you can see right there that benevolence is a highly contextual thing. Justice is not contextual. It is contextual in a certain regard, so I don't want to say that's not, but it's not contextual in this sense. There are contexts in which you should not judge people rationally and treat them accordingly, right? No, there aren't. That's the way that you should judge people. Now, if you say, well, what about an emergency situation where there are no, if you put me in there, we can talk about whether there are some cases. But in regular human life, there's no context in which you should not judge people rationally and treat them accordingly. And there's no context in which you should not go by your own judgment. And there's no context in which you should not recognize that reason, et cetera, right? So, and even honesty, let's play with honesty for a second, because some people have claimed that, well, there's sometimes that it's okay to lie to people, like if a robber comes to you, or Nazi comes to your door and says, are there any Jews in your house? And you've got some Jews hidden in the attic. They say, well, obviously you need to lie to this Nazi. Yes, you do, but that lie is an act of honesty. You are taking into account all of the facts and not ignoring any of them, including the fact that he is evil and he has no right to kill the people in your attic. He is ignoring that fact. He is being dishonest, you are being honest. The lie in that case is an act of honesty. So there's simply no instance in which once you understand what honesty actually is, honesty is not the virtue of always telling the truth. It's the virtue of never faking reality. And by reality, we mean the full context of your knowledge about reality, right? And once you grasp it that way, then you can see that there are no instances in which you should fake reality to gain a value.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. That was very inspiring, the talk you gave. And I took away from it, if I can paraphrase one of our worst presidents, ask not what you can do for your philosophy, ask what your philosophy can do for you. And then you'll begin to appreciate and respect the importance of philosophy in every aspect of one's life. But I want to take issue, I want to be somewhat pedantic, because I think it's very important in your graph. I wish you could pull it up. But the way that maybe you don't see it as an important issue, but my understanding of objectivism is that metaphysics connects directly to art, and then they intersect in morality, and that politics being our means of gaining knowledge, how we organize our social institutions as a form of knowledge, those are more directly connected.
Sure. Let me interrupt,
happy to hear what
because
you
certainly, I mean, no graph or chart is without limits, right? And
It's
so
gonna be-
there are definitely things, I'm using a tool to simplify a very complex thing, and that's the purpose of the hierarchy one, and it's the purpose of the other one.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are ways.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, I'm not sure, because I'm familiar with the schematic because of the course in which Dr. Peacock presents it. And I'm not sure whether or not he makes that distinction of whether it's the importance of whether it's metaphysics to politics or aesthetics versus the other way around.
I don't recall from that course either.
Yeah.
But
That was my basic
art
sense
is
of it.
art. The way that art affects you is through your values, through your
Right.
existing values. So, and it can, and so it in a sense it does go through ethics in that regard. And then there's another sense in which your sort of metaphysical value judgments, and Rand talks a lot about that. I'm trying to leave technical terminology out
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
but there's a lot there, and it's a fascinating field in which I'm not an expert, incidentally.
So I'm always
the art.
like in the other graph on the virtues, I see a real sequence, a real logical sequence that you can then say between these two virtues, you have virtues like courage and confidence between integrity and that. And so I see a real importance in thinking about filling the empty pocket, filling the gap between various related concepts.
Thank you. We got some other questions, so I
Okay.
want to move on. Thank you.
Thank you for your speech. I find a lot of value with what I've learned so far about objectivism. The non-subjective, logically based, realities of the virtues and the values that come with it. And a question that I have is, like, in your personal view, as for me, I believe in God, so I also want to know if you think a belief in God can be compatible with objectivism.
Okay. Can a belief in God be compatible with objectivism? Yes and no. So I'll give you two different ways of looking at this. Objectivism holds that there is no God. It is strictly atheistic. It says, no, there is no God. But objectivism also holds that to be objective and to be independent, you must go by your own judgment. And if your judgment is that you think there is evidence for the existence of God, because the other virtue is reason, right? So if you are in a position where you think, I actually think there's evidence for the existence of God. I think there's evidence and logical argument in support of the idea that there's a God. Then you are going by the same epistemology that I am and that Ayn Rand is. So we have a shared epistemology there. The epistemology is, all right, we're going to accept the existence of things for which there's evidence and logic. Right? In that instance, your conclusion would not be consistent with objectivism, but your methodology would. Okay? You're saying, I want to go by observation, evidence, and logic, and that's exactly what you should be going by. If, however, your method is something different, if your method is, no, I don't care whether there's evidence or logic for God, I want to believe in God on faith and revelation, that's my method. Now you've skipped to a different epistemology. So you're no longer sharing the epistemology and you're completely outside of what the principles of this philosophy are. So I grew up in a Christian household. My father is an Episcopal minister, so I know where you're coming from, and I know where anybody who's in a religious context is coming from. And what I urge you to do is this: use your judgment and ask yourself whether you want evidence to be the base of knowledge or not, or whether faith or revelation is okay with you. But bear in mind this: if faith is a means of knowledge, then you have to take that seriously. If faith is a means of knowledge, then it's a means of knowledge. And that means that if someone has faith that he should behead you, then he should, as a matter of fact, behead you. He knows it. He has knowledge that he should do that. It's real knowledge. He got it by faith. Right? You see the danger in faith being a means of knowledge. And we face this today. We have an enemy that holds faith as a means of knowledge, and they believe that they should kill us precisely because they hold that. That's the problem. They think faith is a means of knowledge, but in my view, it is not. And I think if you study more objectivism, you'll come to the conclusion that it doesn't even make sense to talk about faith as a means of knowledge. There's no method going on there. I wrote an article, and I'll be writing more on this, but I wrote an article titled the Islamic Jihad and Western Faith, or Western Faith and the Islamic Jihad anyway. I get into the idea in that essay of faith being a means of knowledge, and I quote a lot of religious people who are talking about what faith is. And if you read that essay, even though it's sort of got a political bent to it, there's an epistemological element in there that talks about this, and I think you'll find it enlightening.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Please correct me if I am wrong. I believe you stated that when you're talking about art, that throwing a paint can at a canvas from 10 feet away was not art.
Speak
Yes.
up again.
Speak again. That I believe, and I may correct me if I'm wrong, that you described art. You said when you throw a paint can at a canvas from 10 feet away, it is not art. I believe art is in the eye of the beholder. So can you please explain to me how you decide what is and what isn't art?
Okay, good question. So did everybody hear that? All right, so there's a lot to say about this kind of thing in objectivism, and a lot of it is epistemological, because we have to ask the question, why do we need the concept of art? If we were to say that anything so art is in the eye of the beholder, if I'm going to say, well, anything I claim is art, then I can go, there we go, sculpture, painting. So no, but this is so. If anything can be art, then art loses its very meaning. There's no need for the concept. Now, you asked the question, I want to answer it, and we can have back and forth later. I'd be delighted to do that, but there won't be any here. If art is anything people claim it to be, then the very idea of the very need for the concept is gone, because we can just call it a thing. This is the thing I like, that's the thing you like, this is what you like to put on. We don't need the concept at all. So why do we need the concept of art? Because it captures a specific kind of thing in human life, and the concept helps to segregate it from other things in human life. And this is how the objectivist approach to this question would begin. Now, I'm not going to go through the entirety of the formation of the concept of art, but I'll say this. Art, according to objectivism, is a selective recreation of reality in accordance with the artist's, here comes in the word, metaphysical value judgments. Okay, and what this means is just the artist's deepest value judgments. And so some artists have deep value judgments that are just tragic, and they see human life as horrifically all about suffering and misery, and we can't succeed. And so you'll see art like the Scream that we saw an image of the other day in the midst of all the beauty. We got to see that as well. And so that is definitely art. It's art because it's depicting an artist's view of the reality in which we live. However, there is a kind of art in modern art whereby they've abandoned the very idea of recreating reality, and they're just instead throwing things at canvas or putting a cross in a glass of urine and calling it piss Christ or whatever, or putting a urinal in a museum and calling it a piece of art. But there's a reason to not call that art, because it doesn't serve the purpose that art is supposed to serve, which is to concretize our values for us. So there's a broad array of things that can be called art, and much of it I would call personally bad art, but I wouldn't tell you what kind of art you should like. You should enjoy whatever art you enjoy. But there's definitely a place you draw a line, or we just have to call every object on the planet art if anybody just subjectively said that's art to me.
That's
So
not answering my question. I asked why you said it wasn't art.
I didn't say it wasn't art. I actually said that somebody throwing, but I will now say that it's not art. I don't think I actually said that, but I would say it now. Yeah, Jackson Pollock's paintings, to get right to the core of this, where he literally throws paint at a canvas, I would say is not art. Now, I think it would take a long discussion with you for you to understand my full reasoning behind that, but the basic reasoning is essentially what I just said. It doesn't recreate anything. There's no recreation of reality there at all. It's not reflecting any value judgments at all. What it's doing is in my estimate, it's pretending. I think all of that kind of modern art is literal pretense. I think the people who create it are pretending that it's art so that they can get away with that pretense and try to get values dishonestly. And I think the whole field of people who pretend that that's art are pretending that it's art, and I think the entire thing is pretense. That's my view. I'm not telling you that must be your view, but that's my view. And one of the virtues of the philosophy that I embrace is frankness, and that's just where I fall on that. Yes.
So I'm having a little trouble articulating my question. Basically, I was...
Come forward a little bit so we can hear you. Thank you.
Oh. Perfect. Better? So I was saying I'm having a little difficulty articulating my question. It's basically, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your view of the relationship between objectivism on the one hand and freedom and flourishing on the other hand. In one sense, I feel like, or think that objectivism is all about freedom and flourishing, and I really like the terms flourishing. On the other hand, I feel a little bit of concern about describing it that way, because I think it might be misinterpreted by people who aren't that well versed in the philosophy. And for example, I think about in some ways, being able to have freedom or to flourish, the way I think about it, is somewhat depends on circumstances. Whereas if you think about Rands' writings and her fiction, her novels, she describes all kinds of circumstances where her heroes or heroines maybe don't have freedom or aren't flourishing in the stereotypical sense for quite a long period of time, or maybe even a lifetime.
I get the question, so I'll start answering. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
First of all, this conference is not limited to being about objectivism. We were very intentional. When we talk about philosophy for freedom and flourishing, that word philosophy includes objectivism, but objectivism is not the last word on philosophy. There are principles of philosophy that people have developed since objectivism, including some that I've developed, and I know some other people have developed, that I think integrate with objectivism, but that we don't call them objectivism because they're not a part of Ayn Rand's philosophy. And also, any person of self-esteem came up with his own idea in philosophy would want to claim that acknowledge that he came up with that idea. So when I talk about philosophy for freedom and flourishing, I'm not talking about only objectivism for freedom and flourishing. I'm talking about philosophy more broadly. So that's one part of the answer. Another part is that I do think that that objectivism is all about freedom and flourishing. I think that's the purpose of the philosophy, and that was why I talked about that way here. As for the idea that people can use good philosophy, objectivism, and other rational principles, and yet not succeed in life, and that Rand paints these portraits in her fiction as well. That is absolutely true. This objectivism is not the philosophy that guarantees flourishing. It's the philosophy that is for, again, it's not Rand's word, but it's definitely for flourishing. It's for human life and happiness. That's what it's for. But circumstances can be such that, whether political circumstances or health circumstances or accidents can happen to people, whereby you can be going by your best, you can be upholding all of the virtues to the best of your ability, and your life can still turn into chaos or worse. So there's no guarantee in life. We live in a complex world, we're complex beings, and what we can do is understand and grasp and use the very best principles we can get our hands on. And that's what I advocate doing for everyone. I think objectivism is a fabulous set of tools in that regard. They're not my only tools, I have other things too. Just to give you an idea of other tools that are not objectivism. Take David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. Anybody use that book at all? Or any other good self-help system. James Clear's new book, Atomic Habits. There are people who have self-help ideas that are fabulous, and I think they integrate beautifully with objectivism, but they're not objectivism. Well, those are great tools. I'd love to have James Clear come speak at one of these conferences. James, if you are watching this video, please contact me, right? These are great ideas for freedom and flourishing, and there are a lot of people who speak on liberty who are not objectivists who I think have some really good ideas. So the quick answer to all of this is that objectivism is a philosophy for freedom and flourishing, and I think it's the most important one I know of, and it's really fabulous. There are other philosophic ideas that matter, and none of this is a guarantee that we're going to flourish, but it's the best we can do. And for the most part, if you go for it, if you use your mind and pursue your goals, upholding these virtues and understand them, I think you're going to live a fabulous life. And if bad things happen to you along the way, and they invariably do to all of us to some extent, this philosophy also gives you tools to try to work with that adversity to the best of your ability. So that's it. Thank you, guys.